Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Was your wife part of a scam where you had to start an affair with someone else? Today we have a story with a similar plot. Enjoy the show! To be honest, I don't remember much of what happened for quite some time after I saw the photographs. I know I didn't say anything right away, and I remember that Terry looked at me triumphantly for a moment and then suddenly became nervous when she saw the expression on my face. I know that after this, she abruptly gathered her things and quickly left, leaving me to sit not moving, not thinking, and perhaps not even breathing, staring in a stupor for quite a long time at the offending photographs. But I don't remember how I collected the prints, how I left the office, how I walked to the car, or even how I drove home. I have no idea whether I went straight home or not. If someone told me that I passed a dozen red lights or that I stood at an intersection for half an hour, I would believe it. My memories only came back when I found myself sitting in my car parked in the driveway almost 2 hours after Terry dumped the photos on me. My fists and teeth were clenched tightly, and my eyes were watery and unfocused, apparently from undetected tears. I got out of the car in a daze, got to the house, and walked through the front door staggering like a zombie. I walked through the hallway to the sofa in the living room. I plopped down on the sofa and stared at the large grandfather clock whose ticking was the only sound in the quiet room. I felt like my family, my marriage, and my happiness had been given a death sentence, and I was just waiting for it to be carried out. Time passed. It could have been several minutes or even several hours until Rosie returned home with the boys who fortunately had run off to play without noticing that I was home. Rosie usually came home with a lot of energy, but lately, she had been talking about a hard time at work and was not in the best mood, so it was not surprising that she did not call me in her usual excited tone. Instead, she quietly, slowly entered the house, and I could barely make out the sounds of her opening the closet door to put away her coat. And I heard her move towards the room where my computer was installed, apparently looking for me. I heard her call my name softly, then a little louder, but I didn't answer, not knowing if I even wanted to talk to her at that moment. She checked the bedroom and knocked on the bathroom door, continuing to call my name to no avail until she walked into the living room and finally noticed me lying wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling. "Grant, are you okay?" I still didn't answer, and she quickly walked over to me, her motherly reflex of checking my temperature taking over as she put her hand to my head. Her touch somehow made her betrayal clear to me, and I roughly pushed her hand away, sat up, and glared at her. "Don't touch me, Rosie." She took a few steps back, her mouth hanging open, and her eyes narrowed in confusion and worry. She looked at me for a few moments, apparently too surprised or worried to ask any questions. I stared back quietly, smoking nostrils flaring, trying my best to burn a hole in her forehead with my gaze. It must have been clear that I was not going to speak, and then finally, her mouth began to move. What happened, Grant? Are you okay?" I responded with a bitter, angry hiss, my mouth barely opening, my teeth clenched. "No, Rosie. I'm not fine. I'm not okay at all and probably never will be." She moved towards me again, her arms already beginning to open to embrace me when I raised my hand and stopped her with another statement. I said, "Don't touch me, Rosie. I don't want you to ever touch me again." Her eyes filled with tears, and she began to shake her head nervously. I'm not sure, but I think it was at this point that she began to worry that I had somehow found out about her affair. Grant, I'm so sorry." I snorted bitterly, sarcastically shaking my head in disbelief as she continued. "I'm sorry for whatever I did to make you so angry and upset." What did I do?" With sharp, angry movements, I lifted the envelope from the manila and reached inside, pulling out several photographs. "I think you know what you did," I said, crumpling up the first copy and throwing it at her, hitting her in the stomach before it hit the floor. She looked at the wad of paper with fear in her eyes and then began to cry again. She made no move to pick it up, looking at it with fear as if it were a poisonous snake. "You're just lying, cheating." Another lump caught in my throat, this time the blow hit her in the chest. Who can't keep her legs closed, lump in the face for the first guy who took a step towards her. Her gaze turned into an expression of utter horror, sadness, and disbelief, tears streaming down her face and her chin lifted, her already swollen lips pressed tightly together. For some reason, her discomfort made me even angrier, and I picked up the last photo of Des smiling at the camera from behind her as she clutched the sheet on the massage table. Her eyes closed, and her expression once again inscrutable. I stood and held the photograph less than 30 centimeters from her face, spitting out the words like bullets. Or maybe he wasn't the first guy. Maybe he was just the last of many. Rosie screamed as she looked at the photograph and fell to her knees sobbing and gasping, "No, no, 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 oh God, no." Looking at her, I felt a brief surge of compassion, but I fought the urge to comfort her and easily replaced the tender feelings with the anger and disgust that her infidelity had caused. I moved away from her and without saying anything, purposefully walked into the bedroom, lowered my suitcase, and began throwing clothes into it. When it was almost full, she appeared at the door, still crying and containing only a slight coherence of speech. "Grant, please. Grant, no, please, no." I silently continued packing, filled my suitcase and overnight bag, and then brushed past her to grab a few things from the bathroom. She tried to reach me, but I resolutely pushed her away, and she began to sob even louder. A few minutes later, I was standing at the front door, taking my coat out of the closet. Before leaving, she followed me and pressed herself against the front door, blocking my exit. I looked at her, slowly shook my head, and bitterly spat out a single word, "Go away." "No, please, Grant, no, you can't do this." "Oh yes, Rosie, of course, I can. I can do this just like you were able to cheat on me with that." She started mumbling something as I shouted over her, "Grant, forgive me. I don't understand how I let this happen. I love you, and I never intended to. You let this happen because you wanted to be with someone other than your husband, and you ended up betraying us both, cheating on you. I was just trying to console him, and everything just got out of control." We both paused for a moment, breathing quickly and deeply. Her sincerity and despondency more than matched my anger. "Comfort him?" It seemed like a hell of a lot of very personal comfort you were giving him. "Oh please, Grant, please. He was so sad about his wife. She died a few months ago, and he was so sad, and he told me that I was the only one who he can talk to, and I hugged him, and then I don't know how I let this happen, but I didn't. I didn't plan for it. Wait. Did this idiot tell you that his wife just died?" She looked at puzzled. "Well, yes, she was the love of his life, and she had some kind of cancer, and she died very quickly, and he couldn't." I laughed mirthlessly. "God, Rosie, not only are you a cheater, but you're also stupid. I know the guy who set you up. Moreover, I work with him. His name is Devin Tennant, and just so you know, he's not married, stupid. He made up all this crap to get you to cheat, and now you're just another notch in his conqueror's belt." Rosie's mouth dropped open, and she stood with her arms dangling at her sides, slowly shaking her head. She could only weakly utter another request for me to stop as I pushed past her through the door and headed to my car. This night was the worst of my life. I checked into a rundown motel, unpacked my things, and still wearing the covers, collapsed headfirst onto the lumpy, musty-smelling bed. My mind compulsively and chaotically replayed photos of my wife and Devin, and my body responded with intense nausea and deep chest pain that I recognized as some sort of anxiety reaction. I tried to sleep, but there was no chance of it, and I spent the night tormenting myself with Rosie's betrayal. Literally going through most of the stages of grief as if death had happened, feeling denial, anger, and even bargaining with God, but somehow, no closer to acceptance. By the next morning, Saturday, I had settled on anger and decided that the first person to face it would be Devin. I wanted a piece of his flesh, and I would be happy to tear it out with my own teeth. I knew I couldn't attack him at work, and I didn't want to break into his house, so I decided I'd have to approach him outside, maybe in the parking lot of his apartment. I decided that he would be out of town on Saturday night, so I bought a burner cell phone and called him around 10 o'clock, pretending to be a neighbor, telling him that water was pouring from under his door. Half an hour later, he pulled into the parking lot in an old, beat-up Ford. Having parked wherever he had to, he jumped out of the car and jogged across the entire parking lot to his apartment building. I was waiting at the main entrance, and when he reached for the door, I quickly stepped out of the shadows, grabbed his right wrist with one hand. grabbed his left shoulder with the other, and twisted him so that his back hit the wall. For a second, I let him see my face clearly, and then I slammed my forehead into his mouth and punched him in the gut as hard as I could. He fell to the floor, and I knelt down and grabbed his hair to lift his head while growling, "You little. You think you can, my wife, and I'll just laugh at it. My wife." He grunted in pain and spoke, "Listen, guy." His voice angered me, and I kneed him in the face and hit him in the ribs a couple of times. He wheezed again, painfully sucking in air. "Oh my God, do you think God will help such, like you? I should probably just castrate you, get you thrown out of business forever." Damn, I didn't want to do this, but I had to. She was going to set me up if I didn't. I was about to hit him again, but this statement took me by surprise. I knelt down next to him and caught his eye, trying to see if he was lying. "What do you mean she was going to set you up? Are you talking about Terry?" He looked at me in the dim light of the lamp, his stunned eyes having difficulty focusing. "Yes, that. Terry. She said she would lose my job if I didn't cooperate. She showed me several reports that said how bad of a worker I was and that she did everything to ensure that I couldn't find a job anywhere. She even said that she had evidence that pills were found in my locker. Is this true?" He looked at me slightly embarrassed and shrugged. "Maybe so. You ruined my entire marriage because you were afraid of her, or was there something more? Did she offer you more fifth place or what?" He gave me an angry look. "I can't stand this. In fact, I've been trying to figure out how to beat the crap out of her myself without getting hit, but I know that if I do that, she'll pin me down. I'm sure she'll get you too if you try to get even. She's a damn schemer, and that has every reason to be." I gave him a doubtful look. He continued talking, "Listen, man, sorry about all this crap, but I didn't know what the hell to do. Trying to get out of Illinois and finally got a job at the San Diego branch, and she was going to ruin everything for me." He stopped, wiped his mouth, looked at me again, and his expression took on an element of anger instead of fear. "I'm sorry about your wife. I guess I didn't think about what she would, with the photos. But damn, you totally screwed me over by telling Terry you knew her. Seriously, man, as far as I can tell, you started this whole storm. Maybe you should think about that before you attack me, huh?" I looked at him carefully, thought about his words, and reluctantly admitted to myself that he was right. If I hadn't silently threatened Terry with her dating Devin, she would never have used him to set Rosie up. I felt a sudden feeling of extreme disappointment and shame. I reevaluated Devin in light of what I had just realized and thought about his role in this whole farce. In fact, he was neither good nor bad but simply an amoral actor, a young guy who could anyone he wanted and did it. And if someone wanted to direct him in a certain direction so that for some reason he would sleep with a specific woman, he was not going to refuse. Beating him up won't give me satisfaction anymore. For this, I need a time machine. I looked at him for a couple more moments before speaking. "Okay, great. I'm done, okay?" He shrugged. "So I won't expect any more trouble from you, since you're leaving town, right?" He nodded, stunned. "Are you leaving right now?" "As soon as I can," he replied with a hint of disgust. "I want to get out of this mental hospital." True to his word, he quit his job less than a week later. I never saw him again and assumed he had moved to California. As far as I know, he didn't tell anyone that I beat him. I guess I decided I deserved it, at least a little. A week after leaving, I found an apartment near work and tried to settle down there. I went to see a lawyer and gave Rosie a message that I was considering legal separation. The first few days, she tried to talk to me, called me, wrote SMS, but I aggressively avoided her, and not just because he wanted her to suffer. I was having a hard time coping with the situation and was afraid that the sound of her voice might make the situation worse, especially when the conversation ended. But I was desperate to see the boys and needed to pick up my clothes. So eventually, I had to go for some basic socializing. When I finally called, I tried to act cool and professional, but the sound of her voice, vulnerable and quiet, made my heart beat so hard I thought it would burst through my rib cage. Somehow, through an effort of will, I managed to control my voice and actions, negotiate a schedule to visit the boys and pick up my things without making it clear that I was in pain. I hardly spoke to her as I picked up my things, and she stood silently in the living room after greeting me sadly at the door. Sullen and silent, like a model of despondency. I didn't linger because I wanted to keep my anger intact, not diluted by any feelings of compassion or love. I didn't tell anyone at work that Rosie and I were having problems, and I avoided Terry at all costs. I thought long and hard about how to get back at her, considering everything from violence to falsifying records to get her fired. But I knew that Devin was right when he said that Terry was hoping for my retribution and was ready to roast me for any attempt at revenge. After considering all my options, I decided that caution was the better part of valor and began to simply ignore her. Which was not so easy given the feeling of extreme disappointment I felt. In the end, I succeeded by barely tolerating her smug smile and literally biting my tongue whenever I had to communicate with her on any occasion. The first weekend after we sorted out the visitation schedule, I took the boys. I picked them up after school and brought them to my apartment, which was new and unusual to them. They decided that it was the best thing they had seen, considering it something like an elite club and not a real second home. I wanted them to look forward to seeing me, so I didn't do anything special to dissuade them from it and told them that we would always try to have fun whenever they came. That evening, we went to a pizza place, rented a Disney movie, and played Xbox. The boys were smiling, and I was having a great time until I put them to bed, and Sam, my 8-year-old, asked when I was coming home. Sam, I'm home, I stuttered. Your mom and I, well, we decided to live in 2 different places, so now you have 2 houses, 2 places to stay overnight. Sam looked at me thoughtfully. Dad, I don't think Mom likes this. Well, buddy, I don't think I like it either, but that's the way it's supposed to be. I have this apartment, and I live here. Your mom has her apartment, and she lives there. And you and Tommy will live in both places. I think it would be better if we all lived in both places. Can't you live at home during the week, and we could all come here to have fun on the weekends? I tried to explain to him that Rosie and I simply could not live together anymore, but the conversation continued to move in circles of words that innocent 8-year-old children usually construct from the half-truths and euphemisms that adults feed them when they do not want to show them the ugly side of life. I finally had to tell him it was just something I couldn't fully explain, kissed him on the forehead, and told him to go to bed. I went to bed that night thinking about how terribly unfair parents' mistakes can be to their innocent children. The next morning, I was woken up by the doorbell followed by a loud knock. I pulled on my robe and stumbled across the hall into the living room, stopping in front of the door to ask who was there. Police officers, Mr. Simmons. We would like to ask you a few questions. When the police are at your door, 1,000 thoughts are running through your head. Did you remember to pay your parking fines? Have they gone so far as to check your cache of pirated DVDs? But I quickly put those thoughts aside and decided that their visit was related to a divorce, perhaps a restraining order, or something similar. I opened the door a crack and looked outside, and there stood 2 real police officers with neutral expressions. One short and pot-bellied with his arms folded across his chest, and the other a little taller and more muscular with his hands on his hips. How can I help? We'd like to come in and talk to you for a few minutes, Mr. Simmons. What does this mean? Can we come in, please? Probably a smarter person could have asked for a search warrant, but I just stupidly opened the door and let them in without saying anything. They quickly pushed their way in and took a seat on either side of me, both looking around the room a little and then looking back at me a couple of times before the tall one started asking questions. Okay, Mr. Simmons, just a couple of questions about last night, if you don't mind. Last evening? Yes, where were you last evening? I was here last evening. Almost the whole evening. Took my boys out for pizza, but other than that, we hung out here. Can you, prove it? Huh? Can you prove that you were here last evening? Well, I guess you can ask my boys. I still have the receipt from the pizzeria, I think. Can we see it? I went to the closet, rummaged through my coat, and managed to find the receipt. I handed it to the tall officer, who looked at it for a few minutes and then handed it to the plump one, who looked at it, shrugged his shoulders, and nodded his head. The time indicated is 7:43, said the tall policeman, writing something in a notebook. I started to come out of my daze and became curious again. Hey, listen, what is this? What is this about? The policemen glanced at each other questioningly, and the pot-bellied man shrugged and nodded. The tall policeman turned to me and spoke again. There was an attack last night, and the victim was badly beaten. We're just checking. His implication that I was somehow a suspect in a serious crime was so shocking that I couldn't help but interrupt him. Wait, what? I haven't been in a fight since middle school. Is it some mistaken identity or something? I have. The tall policeman raised his hand to stop me. Look, Mr. Simmons, we have to check all the leads, okay? This is our job. You're not under arrest. We're just asking some questions. I threw up my hands in agreement but still felt like I had been caught up in some kind of law enforcement blunder. I had to take a couple of deep breaths to deal with my disappointment. When it was clear that I had calmed down, they asked me a few more questions about what I had done the night before and checked with my boys that they were with me. When they sleepily snuck into the living room, seemingly satisfied, they both wrote something down. After which, the pot-bellied cop whispered something to the tall cop, who turned back to me. One more thing, Mr. Simmons. Can I look at your hands? I held out my hands. He briefly examined them on both sides and nodded. Fine. I'd like to see your forearms. Okay. Without answering, I pulled up my sleeves to my elbows and showed my forearms to both officers. Could you roll up your sleeves a little more? In desperation, I took off my entire robe and stood before them in my boxer shorts. My arms and legs meekly spread out like a suburban version of the Vitruvian Man. Will it suit you? I asked. That will do, Mr. Simmons, the tall policeman said, and then turned to his partner. Do we need anything else? The short cop moved forward and opened a small notebook as I put on my robe. Yes, a couple more questions, I think. He cleared his throat and looked straight at me. How are things going at your place of work? Sorry, what do you mean? I mean, how are things at work? Are there any problems? Wait, what's the matter? Did something happen at work? The two cops looked at each other for a second, and the taller one nodded briefly, apparently giving the go-ahead to give me more information. No, Mr. Simmons. As I said, this happened last night and not at your place of work. It was one of your colleagues. I suddenly became worried that I had beaten Devin Tinian much worse than I thought and that he had decided to turn me in. But I quickly dismissed this fear as irrational, since I had attacked Devin almost 2 weeks earlier. And they were asking questions and testing evidence in such a way that it was clear they didn't know who committed the crime. Which wouldn't necessarily have been the case if Devin had pointed it out to them. I bit my lip and hesitantly asked a question that I was almost afraid to hear the answer to, my voice sounding much more nervous than I would have liked. Who was hurt? The policemen looked at each other again and exchanged glances. The short man looked back, caught my eye, and again answered in an affected tone. One of the managers in your office, I think you know her. A woman named Terry Lee. I don't know, but I probably gasped a little when he said it. And what I do know is that I suddenly developed an irritating twitch in my right hand, which I felt compelled to tuck into my robe pocket. The policeman continued, apparently oblivious to my increasing discomfort. She is said to be somewhat, unpopular with some people in your office, including you. Can you shed some light on this? Can you name anyone in your office who might not like her enough to personally attack her? I tried my best to remain calm and swallowed hard a couple of times as I thought about how to answer this question. Yes, I know someone who would like to beat Terry. There are many of them. But I didn't think any of them would do it, except maybe Devin Tinian himself. I was trying to figure out how to beat the crap out of her myself without getting hit, kept ringing through my head. But for some reason, I didn't have the strength to suggest him as a suspect. So I just shook my head in bewilderment. Nobody, well, they didn't like her very much, but no one would beat her, I choked. They asked a couple more questions, but I don't remember them being of any importance. Then they thanked me for my time and turned to leave. As they were leaving, the tall guy turned and looked me straight in the eye. For a minute, and listen, Mr. Simmons. If you think of anyone who may have done this, for any reason, you must tell us. Do you understand? Of course, I understand. I said nervously, biting my lip as I slowly closed the door behind them. On Monday morning, the office became a hornet's nest of gossip. Almost everyone I talked to asked me what I thought of Terry, and her group of sycophantic secretaries abruptly stopped talking and gave me a collective dirty look every time I walked by. Around noon, the 2 police officers from Saturday showed up, and my heart sank as I thought that I would be embarrassed at work with new questions. But they went to a group of tables to the side of my area, asked one of the clerks something, and he pointed to Gabe Prince's desk. I watched as quietly as possible as they asked him questions and saw how he became agitated every now and then during the conversation. Finally, they said something, he seemed to refuse, they said something again, and I saw Gabe reluctantly roll up his shirt sleeves and show the police his forearms. After that, they took some notes, asked a few questions to the secretary, and then left the building. Not even a couple of minutes had passed when Benny Smith, one of the accountants, walked up to Gabe, talked to him for a couple of minutes, and then carefully made his way to my desk. Without invitation, he sat down in the chair opposite me, looking at me expectantly, a strange grin appearing on his face. "What?" I asked. "So, you did it," he said. "What did I do?" "Come on, Grant. You were the one who beat Terry." "No, damn it. Do you all think so?" "Well, Terry thinks you are." "Wait, what? How could she think it was me? And how do you know what she's thinking?" Bernie considered my words for a minute and then leaned forward conspiratorially, speaking in a low voice. "Look, can I trust you to keep a secret?" I gave him a doubtful look but nodded my head. "I know it's against the rules to meet with employees we supervise, especially in the middle of all this politically correct sensitivity training. But I've been dating Debbie Perkins for quite some time now, you know, and she communicates quite closely with Terry. I remember Debbie hanging out with Terry a lot and was more than a little surprised that someone in her group was openly breaking corporate dating rules. But then I remembered Devin Tinian's experience with Terry herself and realized that I shouldn't be surprised at anything." Bernie fell silent, apparently waiting for my reaction, interested in what he had to say. I nodded and invited him to continue. He leaned even closer and continued in an even quieter voice. "So, Debbie visits Terry in the hospital and gives me the information. I haven't told anyone anything, but I thought you might be interested in finding out what it was all about." I sat back in my chair, still not saying anything, and waited. "So, you want to know?" he asked, with some impatience. "Well, yes, I would like to know." "Well, I mean, if she's accusing me of something I didn't do, I'd like to know why. Is she setting me up, or what is this, a setup?" Bernie looked around to see who might be watching and then leaned toward me again. "No, I don't think so. You see, Terry still couldn't get a good look at the guy. She doesn't say it was you, she just says it could very well be you." It was completely unbelievable to me that Terry had no idea who her attacker was, and I'm sure my facial expression reflected that. Bernie paused for a moment and then started again. "Listen, she was coming home on Friday. It was already dark, about 8 o'clock or something like that. She was shopping or something and was getting bags out of the trunk when this guy grabbed her from behind and practically threw her face down on the ground. He grabbed her by the hair and slammed her face into the asphalt several times, then covered her mouth with his forearm to prevent her from screaming. I think he held her very tightly and began driving his knee into her crotch over and over again, occasionally hitting her face with his free hand." Bernie paused to gauge my reaction. From what he said, it sounded more like an assault than a robbery, and I suppose I can understand how anyone would think I had enough motivation to do it. I motioned for him to continue anyway. I guess Terry somehow managed to bite through his forearm pretty good. She claimed she bit right through the guy's shirt and got to the point where she's sure she broke the skin. But even this did not stop the guy. In fact, I think it made him angrier, and he pulled his hand back and punched her in the other side of the face several times. Finally, Terry saw the headlights of a car pulling into the parking lot, and the guy got off her and sped away. Did he say anything? Not a word. I don't think he even swore when Terry bit his hand. That's one of the reasons the cops thought it might have been someone she knew, you know, didn't want her to recognize the voice or anything. And she didn't see him even when he was running away. Not quite. I mean, she was badly beaten and it was dark, and I think the dude was dressed like a regular bad guy, dark clothes, and he had ski goggles on or something like that. I let out a long sigh, realizing that I had more or less been holding my breath while listening to the story. Wow, was all I could say. So, yeah, the cops asked her who might have a grudge against her, and she immediately named you. When he said this, I felt a little panicked and briefly considered sharing my suspicions about Devon to confirm my innocence, but decided to remain silent. I answered him in a voice that I hoped sounded more indignant than nervous. Well, damn it, it wasn't me, and the cops need to know that. That evening I was with my children, and lo and behold, I rolled up my sleeves to show my arms. Nobody but me, I said. Bernie shrugged, looking at his hands, and then stood up to leave. Well, someone did it, and I think the cops are right if they think it's someone she knows. He smiled and winked mysteriously before returning to his desk. I was having a really hard time sleeping with all the problems at work, the investigation, and probably most of all, the absence of Rosie. I could not accept that she had betrayed me, given herself to a man in a scheme that was deliberately designed to hurt and humiliate me. I understood that she was not an active part of the scheme, that she had been manipulated to some extent, like a pawn on a chessboard. But there was no denying that she had allowed herself to fall into Devon's arms, effectively stabbing me in the back. Still, I missed her. I missed her quirky sense of humor, mischievous smiles, and deep, throaty laugh that was so incredibly infectious. We missed our conversations, jokes, and her words of encouragement during difficult times. I missed her affection, her kisses, her hugs while we were watching TV or listening to music, or long after we had both fallen asleep. And I missed making love to her. One night, while tossing and turning in bed, I suddenly realized that I was very aroused. I took out my laptop and watched a silent adult film to try to find inspiration, but for some reason, my thoughts kept going back to the experiences I had with Rosie. I remembered our first kiss, which happened in the middle of the dance floor during slow music in a club aimed at college students. As we danced, her body seemed to merge more and more with mine, pressing against me as if everything she touched became a part of her. She wrapped her arms around my neck, and when I pulled away to look at her, I felt like she was laying claim to me as a person with her clear, unblinking brown eyes and light, warm smile. I leaned forward and kissed her, tasting the cherry from her lip gloss. She kissed me back, and in that moment, I knew I would be hers if she wanted. I remembered the first time we made love in a small house in northern Wisconsin while the other members of the group we were with had gone skiing. We began to cuddle together under the heavy blanket on one of the beds. I remember well that at the moment of my first intimacy with her, I had never before experienced anything like that mixture of physical pleasure and emotional satisfaction. By the time we finished, I was completely exhausted, and we fell asleep in each other's arms, covered only with a blanket, not caring at all that anyone might find us. I remembered our honeymoon, a week spent in a rundown hotel on the beach in Florida. We spent our days basking in the sun, and at night, we enthusiastically made love, pressing our sweaty bodies against each other. Regardless of the poor living conditions, the insufficiently large bed, or the substandard air conditioning. It seemed like we tried everything and explored every part of each other's body, discovering different, sometimes unexpected sensitive areas with each new session. Sometimes we made love tenderly, languidly, and sometimes we simply attacked each other with incredible passion, almost desperately trying to achieve and deliver a climax. I especially remember our last night spent on a towel under the moonlight on an empty beach. With the sound of the waves crashing softly on the shore in the background, as we wordlessly, sincerely shared our love. When the last thought was over, I rolled over and fell asleep, obsessively thinking about the woman I loved and hated at the same time. Life went on slowly and painfully at work. Many people, not just Terry's friends, gave me questioning, accusing looks, and I had a hard time concentrating. At that moment, I was glad I hadn't told the police or anyone else about how Terry set up my wife to cheat on me. I guess she didn't say anything either because no one, not the police, not Bernie, not anyone at work, ever said they knew about Rosie's infidelity, let alone that Terry might have had anything to do with it. I was glad for this little secret because if this story had come out, I would have risen even higher on the list of suspects, and the suspicions and hassles from the police would have only gotten worse. At home, I spent a lot of time staring at the ceiling, the TV, or a book, not really understanding anything. My mind was foggy, and I couldn't control my emotions. Between the collapse of my marriage, stress at work, and being a person of interest in an assault case, I was lonely, hurt, disoriented, and more than a little depressed. I thought things were going to get a lot worse when Jim Gumpers called me into his office on the Thursday after Terry's attack. I slowly walked up to his office, feeling like I was walking to the gallows, carefully placing one foot in front of the other until I stood in front of the open door, watching him work, head down at the massive oak desk. After a few moments, I coughed to let him know I was there. He looked up, smiled, and waved at me. "Hey, Grant, close the door and sit down, okay?" he said, unclenching his hands and leaning forward toward the table. I stepped into the room and closed the door, then carefully sat down on the chair on the other side of his desk. He clasped his hands behind his head and leaned back in his chair, slowly chewing his gum and looking me over before speaking. "Grant, I'll get straight to the point," he said, leaning forward toward the table. "We're very alarmed that in the last few days the police have been roaming around here and searching employees. We don't like the impression it gives, and we really don't like the idea that they thought Terry's attacker might be working here. So, we did a little research to figure out what the hell was going on here that would make the police think the attacker worked here." He paused and clasped his hands together in front of him, tapping his fingertips together as he seemed to consider what he wanted to say next. "To be frank, Grant, we think there's a bad mix of workers down there, kind of a toxic situation." His words seemed like a prelude to demotion or worse. My pulse quickened, and I felt myself break out in a sweat as I waited for the axe to fall. "So, Grant, we looked at everything about this division and decided that we need to unify the leadership. We're going to move Terry into the marketing department, and you'll take over her responsibilities along with yours." I was so sure that I would be fired that I didn't immediately realize that I had heard him correctly. When I didn't answer right away, he became a little nervous and quickly added a few more words. "Of course, Grant, you will receive some compensation for the additional duties. I think you'll find it quite generous." He looked at me with hope and some anxiety, and I suddenly understood what he said and realized that I had to answer. "Well, yes, that sounds great. I think I can handle it, and I think everything should work out." We spent the next half hour or so discussing his expectations, my responsibilities, and the compensation package. I felt a little disoriented but managed to remain businesslike throughout the entire process. Finally, he turned around, shook my hand, congratulated me, and I turned to leave his office. "One more thing, Grant," his voice took on a concerned quality, and I turned to face him with a slight sense of trepidation. "Yes?" I responded. "We need to make sure that we don't have to worry about any nasty surprises." I gave him a questioning look. He cleared his throat and continued, "To put it bluntly, Grant, you had nothing to do with the attack on Miss Lee, did you?" I shook my head, putting on my most sincere expression. "No, sir, it wasn't me." "And you don't know who did it?" I replied. "No, sir, I don't know." I left the room feeling much better than when I entered it and returned to my apartment, thinking about how strange everything had turned out. I had been trying for months, actually years, to reduce Terry's influence in my unit, and after trying all kinds of diplomatic maneuvers, I finally got my way when some mysterious person, almost certainly one of our employees or maybe Devin himself, beat her half to death. I tried to tell myself that this couldn't have happened to a nicer girl, but somehow it was not good to gloat under such circumstances, even to myself. But still, for the first time in weeks, I felt something akin to happiness, that maybe things would calm down, that the stress at work would pass, and life would become more bearable again. This feeling lasted until I looked at my calendar and remembered that the next day I had an appointment with Rosie at my lawyer's to begin the proceedings of our separation. My lawyer was a smartly dressed, balding little man who wore wire-rimmed glasses and a three-piece suit. He was sitting next to me in his office, shuffling papers, when Rosie came in alone. She was dressed modestly in a long skirt and conservative peasant blouse, and her hair was braided in a French braid. It was hardly hot, but I thought she was beautiful, and I resisted the urge to say she looked great. She stopped in front of the table and gave me a weak, hesitant smile. "Hello, Grant." "Hello, Rosie." "Thank you for coming." My lawyer stood up and shook her hand, introducing himself at the same time. "Mrs. Simmons, I am Lincoln Parker, and I represent your husband. Why don't you sit here, and we'll get started? Rosie nodded and half smiled, then carefully straightened her skirt and sat down in the chair opposite me. Okay, Parker began, pushing papers across the table to Rosie. We just need you to look at some of these papers to make sure that. Rosie coughed and interrupted him. I don't think Grant and I have the same goals. I only do it because I feel I have to, not because I want or think it is necessary. Parker nodded to indicate that he understood. This is just to, formalize your separation. It doesn't have to become something permanent. This will make everything easier, no matter how you two move on. But this is a preliminary step to divorce, isn't it, Mr. Parker? Yes, it may be so. But this does not mean that divorce is inevitable. Rosie nodded sadly and took the papers, looking through each page, shaking her head every now and then, letting out a melancholic sigh at times. Finally, she raised her head, her eyes slightly glazed over, and her lips pursed into a bitter grimace. Sorry, but I just don't want to sign this. I really want to work on our marriage. I do not think that. Rosie, please, I tried to keep my voice soft but firm and adamant. I need time and space. We can't just forget about everything. She chewed her lip thoughtfully, obviously considering my words before answering. Will you at least work with me? Will you think about it? I know I ruined everything, I know it, but Grant, please, I'm not a cheater. I didn't look for it and won't look for it again. Deep down, I think you know it. I think you know that I was never going to do that again, whether I got caught or not. I thought about it for a minute and felt that, for the most part, she was right. She didn't want to cheat, she was kind of tricked into it, and I knew she didn't have the personality to be a serial cheater. However, I was deeply hurt, and her actions were my main weapon. So, I cleared my throat and chose my words carefully. If I can somehow find a way through this, maybe if I can find a way to trust you, a way around this betrayal, I'll do it, Rosie. But until then, I see no other way but to break up. I just don't see it. For a moment, I thought she was going to argue, to tell me that I was wrong and that separation was a huge mistake. But she seemed to swallow her aggression and paused before speaking. Okay, she finally said, nodding her head meekly as a small tear formed in the corner of her eye and ran down her cheek. Okay, I'll sign. Lincoln nodded and took the form. Okay, then, here's the official agreement. Both of your signatures are needed here. He slid the form across the table to Rosie for her to sign first. She took the pen, hesitated for a moment, and then slowly wrote her name at the bottom. She held the form for a moment, then picked up her purse and carefully put it away. Sorry, Miss Simmons, but this is not for you. Mr. Simmons must also sign this, and it will remain in my custody. You will both receive copies. Oh, okay, sorry, she answered awkwardly and with some embarrassment, then took the form out of her purse, unfolded it, and stood up to hand the paper to me. As she reached across the table to hand me the paper, the sleeve of her blouse slid down her arm about 15 centimeters. And just as quickly as it happened, she immediately grabbed the sleeve and sharply pulled it up to her wrist, sitting back down. Now, the unintentional lifting of someone's sleeve up their arm is one of those things that happens quite often and is usually so completely unimportant that it barely registers with the consciousness of anyone who sees it, an action that gets lost among the million other little things that happen at any given time. But in this case, it completely changed my state of mind. The moment her forearm was exposed, I saw a sudden flash of dark color staining the entire exposed skin. A huge bruise that seemed to be painted on her arm like an ugly watercolor of blue, green, and yellow, dripping with a dark purple center and a gauze bandage. It was sharp and painful and exactly what the police were looking for when they asked to see my hands. I stood in stunned silence for a moment, thinking about what I had just seen and what it meant. I've heard stories of women lifting trees, cars, or other incredibly heavy objects off their children during times of extreme stress. Stories that speak of countless fountains of strength that can be called upon in times of emergency. But I had never seen an attack like this. Driven by anger, a pure, unadulterated desire to punish another woman who had set her up to ruin her marriage. However, I saw it, direct evidence that a woman half my size mustered enough strength and anger to carry out a personal attack so brutal that the victim. And the police did not even consider the possibility that it was carried out by anyone other than a large, very hostile man. I must have been staring into space for a while, as the implications of what I had just seen continued to sink in because Parker cleared his throat to get my attention. When I looked at him, he gestured to the paper as if saying, "Sign so we can get out of here." I looked down at the form, but my mind was so preoccupied with what I had just learned about my wife that I couldn't bring myself to understand what it said, couldn't even really see the words. I raised my head to look at Rosie again, and there was no doubt that my expression was still one of disbelief and surprise, my mouth open and my eyes wide with amazement. Rosie looked back at first with an expression of concern or even concern, but then a mysterious smile appeared on her face, a knowing, slightly mischievous Mona Lisa grin that confirmed all my suspicions. We sat and looked at each other for quite a long time until Parker cleared his throat again. I didn't even look at him this time, refusing to look away from Rosie, trying to decide what exactly I should make of this strange new revelation. Finally, Rosie broke the deadlock and began to move. She stood up lazily and then smoothly, like a cat, walked around the table and came to me. She leaned towards me and whispered in my ear, hoarsely and sensually, and her breath made the hairs on my neck stand on end. "You can sign the paper if you want, Grant, or you can put down your pen, follow me outside, and try to fix our marriage. We can start tonight by celebrating how I kicked that queen last Friday night. Everything depends on you." With that, she carefully walked out of the room with slow, measured steps, looking back to flash a nervous, hidden smile and raising her eyebrows as she closed the door. All the while, I sat woodenly in my chair, still completely stunned by what had just happened, what I had just discovered. I didn't know what to do at all. I had been contemplating for weeks the depth of betrayal and the destruction of trust associated with Rosie's infidelity. And I had come to the conclusion that even if somehow I was able to let it go, it would take time and separation before I could try to move forward again in a relationship with her. But what now? What should I do about what Rosie did? I suppose a more worthy person would have been horrified or disgusted by her actions, but God help me. The image in my mind of her beating the crap out of our common tormentor somehow changed my worldview. This is a woman literally fighting for her marriage and doing it in an incredibly dangerous and aggressive manner. How can I let such a woman go? Parker coughed again, and I looked at him. "Well," he said, holding out his hands in a tense, expectant gesture. I slowly shook my head, put down my pen, shrugged my shoulders in surrender, and began to stand up. "Sorry, but I can't sign this." "I just can't," I said, shaking my head in apology. When he raised his eyebrows, I continued, "I'm really sorry." With my heart pounding and a feeling of relief and anticipation, I turned away from him and quickly walked towards the door and my worthless, cruel, beautiful little wife. How would you react if you found out your wife was in this situation? What would you do? Write your opinion in the comments. See you in the next video.